Hi everyone, Kevin here. Today I want to walk through how you can nail a product manager interview. I've interviewed at many different companies, including Amazon, Microsoft, Accenture, and I've gotten offers from all of them. I've also been on the other side of the interview as an interviewer. I worked at Microsoft for 14 years and I interviewed hundreds of different candidates. Some of them got offers and some of them did not get offers. I'll walk through the tips and the strategies and techniques to make it as likely as possible that you'll get an offer. I figured the best way to demonstrate some of these techniques is to conduct a mock interview, so I found a candidate and I brought him in today. I'll let him introduce himself. Oh, hi. Yeah, no, Kevin here as well. I guess we both have the same name. I have my interview outfit on today and I've been preparing quite a bit. I hear this guy Kevin's kind of a tough interviewer though. Hopefully I could land the job. Great, thanks for introducing yourself. Before we jump into it, as a quick note, in the description of this video, you'll find a whole bunch of sample interview questions. This is a fantastic resource to practice coming up with examples and answers to those questions. And today we'll pick one of those and we'll walk through it. To kick off, first we're gonna start with how you can prepare for an interview, and I'll let interviewee Kevin talk about how he's been preparing for this interview. Preparation, that is perhaps the most important step you can take to nail your product manager interview. And I recommend 3 different items to prepare for your interview. The first one, and this is really a state of mind. When you go in for an interview, not only is the company interviewing you to see if you're a good match for the company, but you're also interviewing the company to see if that's even a place you want to work. So keep that in mind when you go in for an interview. Number 2, you want to make sure that your resume is in a very good state. Why is that? Well, every single person who you interview with, chances are they've looked at your resume shortly before you come in for your interview. So in a sense, it's your first impression to the interviewer. You want to make sure that it's brief, that it's concise, and that it really simply shows the highlights of you. You want it to be like a movie trailer, not the movie. And step number 3, the most important item. I mentioned earlier that I have sample questions in the description of this video. Look at those. Think of examples that you can share with the interviewer. When you go into an interview, when you get a question, if you've already heard that question before and you already have a response prepared for that question, you're going to do really well. So that's one of the most important steps that you can take. So hopefully I could use this preparation today and I'll do well in my interview. Now let's talk about the interviewer a little bit and some of the preparation that they do. The first thing to know about the interviewer is, first off, I'm probably a really respected person within the organization and people trust my judgment and my decisions. Ultimately, I'm on point to bring new people into the organization. That's why I'm in this position. Now, it's not just me interviewing. Usually when you go in for a day of interviews, you interview with maybe 4 to 5 different people. And so I'm interviewing as part of a team and I'm one member of that team. Usually what happens, at least this is what we did at Microsoft, each person on that team of interviewers would take a different competency. So once again, I have all these sample questions in the description. Each one of those falls under a different competency. For example, you have things like customer empathy, design, technical ability. All of these are different competencies and an interviewer will focus on one of those different areas. So when you interview 4 or 5 different people, it paints an overall picture of who you are as a candidate. Another thing to keep in mind as me as an interviewer, I also have my full-time job. I'm just doing this interviewing stuff on the side. I'm basically volunteering to do this to bring in new people into the organization. So I'm pretty busy and interviewing is one more thing that I need to get done. That's why, once again, with the resume, make sure that it's brief, concise, and just shows the highlights because I don't have time to go through a 2, 3, 4-page resume. Also, when you're describing your different bullet points on the resume, make sure they're understandable. I don't have time to research different buzzwords or different jargon. I just want you to tell it to me straight. Lastly, as an interviewer, chances are I'm not just interviewing you, I'm also interviewing many other people. Ultimately, when you're interviewing, you're not just trying to impress the interviewers, you're also competing against other interview candidates. And as an interviewer, I usually interview many different people, and so I can calibrate how you performed compared to all these other people I interviewed. So keep that in mind as well. Now, we've been talking about the importance of resumes, and I want to take a moment to talk about how I structured my resume for my interview today, because I know that Kevin's probably going to look at my resume and he'll make a judgment. That's his first impression of me as a candidate coming in. So the way I structured my resume, I wanted to show highlights about me. The best way to think of it is it's a movie trailer, and the actual movie itself, well, I'll share that when I go in for the interview, and I have a lot more time to share some of those details. So some of the key things to remember: you want to be brief, you want to be concise with your resume. So how do you actually structure it? Well, I personally use the ACRQ format. What does that mean? Well, first you have your action, then you have a little bit of context, followed by the result, and then you quantify the result. So why don't we take an example from my YouTube channel? So let's start with the action. I launched a YouTube channel. That was the action I took. A little bit of context on that. Well, I launched a YouTube channel providing high quality tutorial videos. And hopefully all of you think that they're high quality tutorial videos, but that's the context. Next, we need some type of result. And so the result of all of that is, well, I generate views and I generate watch time. So I launched a YouTube channel providing high quality tutorials, and it generates views and watch time. But that doesn't mean that much because I need to quantify that result. So to quantify the result, I'll throw in, well, how many views do I get and how much watch time I get. So now to see the final bullet point, I'll say something like launched a YouTube channel featuring high quality tutorial videos that generates over 200,000 views a day and over 12,000 watch hours. Now that's a pretty powerful bullet point, and trust me, I think interviewers will appreciate it when you write your bullet points that way. Next, I want to spend a few moments talking about what the structure of an interview is like. And now you're going to interview with probably 4 to 5 different people, and I'm just one person during the interview day. Now, once again, I have a certain competency that I want to evaluate, just like everyone else who's part of the interview team. Now, usually each interview will be about an hour, and so when you come in for the interview, usually the first 5 or 6 minutes are simply to establish rapport and to have some small talk. And the main reason for that and the objective of that is to help lessen anxiety and nervousness. When someone comes in for an interview, you tend to be nervous, and rightfully so. It's a big day. And so this is meant to lessen that. The last thing you want to do as an interviewer is start firing off questions right when your candidate walks in, and maybe they won't perform their best because they're so nervous. So this is meant to just lessen some of that. As an interviewer, the next thing I'll do then is say, okay, now we're going to launch into the core of the interview, and I'll ask you 3 to 4 questions, and this will take about 45 minutes. And then we launch into the questions. As the interviewer, of course, I want to do less of the talking. I want to learn from the candidate. So I'll end up maybe talking, let's say 10 to 20% of the time, and the candidate will speak for about 80% of the time. Once we run through the core questions, at that point, I'll leave about 10 minutes at the end to say, hey, do you have any questions for me? And once again, an interview goes both ways. I want to see if they're a good fit for the company, and the candidate should see if the company is a good fit for them. Once the interview wraps up, well, at that point, I type up my notes of how the interview went against the competencies that I was on point to evaluate. I also say whether I think the candidate is a hire or a no hire. One thing to keep in mind is when you're going through an interview day, we don't share whether it's a hire or no hire until the very end. The last thing you want to do is be the first person in the interview and say no hire and then bias everyone else who comes after you. So each interviewer is basically kind of an independent perspective of how you performed. At the very end of the day, all of the interviewers will share the results. If everyone says hire, well, it's an easy decision, and then you're brought on board. If everyone says no, that's also an easy decision. If it's mixed, this is the more interesting case where all of the interviewers then come together and they discuss how you performed. Sometimes it'll fall in the direction of getting an offer, and sometimes it'll fall in the direction of not getting an offer. But ideally, you're in the position where everyone says hire. Okay, enough talk. Why don't we jump into this mock interview? I have a candidate waiting, and I want to see how this candidate performs. So let's get started. First off, Kevin, thank you so much for joining today. It's really great to have you here. Yeah, no, thank you so much. Really excited to be here. You know, this is really a beautiful studio that you have. I'm really impressed by all the lights and the cameras. It's all pretty cool. I really heard a lot about this organization as well. Oh yeah, no, absolutely. This is really a beautiful place to work. Remember, the first few minutes, this is where we're reducing anxiety, we're establishing some rapport. And once we wrap that up, then we'll shift into the main portion of the interview. All right, shifting gears, now I want to ask you a few questions and we'll run through the standard portion of the interview. Then at the end, I'll give you a little bit of time to ask me any questions that you might have. The first question is, can you tell me about the strategies that you've used to increase your understanding of current and also future customer needs? At this point, as an interviewer, I've asked my question. I might jump in to probe or to dig a little bit deeper, but otherwise, the ball's now in Kevin's court and it's his opportunity to answer my question and to demonstrate his customer empathy competency. Let's see how he does. Okay, so I got the question, and this is basically a customer connection question. How have I worked with customers in the past? So I know the question, and luckily this is very similar to some of the sample questions I looked at, so I already have a response that I can provide. Now, of course, if you don't understand the question or you didn't think something was clear, ask the interviewer to give more details or maybe explain it again. By the way, that also gives you a little bit more time to pull together your thoughts and start preparing your answer. Now, one thing I recommend doing when you're going to provide your response to a question is to use what's called the STARS format. This is a very good framework for responding to a question. So what is the STARS format? Well, first we start with the S, which means situation. Now, when you're responding to a question, keep in mind that the interviewer knows nothing about the example that you're going to share. So you have to give a little bit of background first. So I'm going to give an example of how I've worked with customers on my YouTube channel. Basically, a customer is kind of like a viewer. Basically, I'm serving customer or viewer needs. So I'm going to use this as one of my examples. So I'll say something like, yeah, I want to share an example from my YouTube channel. And I founded my YouTube channel. It's actually something I set up back in 2017. And I started this when I worked at Microsoft. And it's a tech-focused channel. I pull together a whole bunch of tutorials and how-to videos. And it's grown quite a bit. It now gets over 200,000 views a day and over 12,000 watch hours. So that's a little bit of background of the story or example that I'm going to share. Once you talk about the situation, next we want to talk about what you are actually responsible for, or what I like to call the task. This is the second part of STARS, the T. And so when you're in a job, well, you have some type of responsibility. So back to my YouTube example, I might say, along with founding this channel, well, I was really on point for doing everything related to this channel. So coming up with video ideas, writing the script for the video, filming the video, editing the video, creating the thumbnail, writing the description, all the tags, basically the end-to-end flow of creating a video was all on me. Along with that, I also researched additional video ideas. So once again, this is just giving a little bit of information on what my task or my job was. The next item of STARS is A, or the action that you took. And this is really the core of the response. We've already given the background or the situation, the S. We've talked about what you were responsible for, or the T, or the task that you were on point for. And now for the action, I need to talk about what I actually did to understand customer needs. And so I might structure my answer and say, well, there were both qualitative and quantitative things I did to understand my viewers or my customers. I'll start with the qualitative ones first. Now, one of the main ways of getting feedback is through comments. So frequently people will share what they like, what they dislike. Also, I shared a survey and I solicited responses from people as another mechanism to get feedback. Now, as Kevin's going through his response, as the interviewer, of course, I'll take notes and I'll listen intently on what he's saying. Now, my role as an interviewer is to make sure I really understand the scenario and if it demonstrates him connecting well with customers. So I'll be listening for that. Now, what I might do is I might ask him to go deeper. I'll probe. I'll say, hey, can you tell me more about that? You said that you read comments and there were things people liked or disliked. Can you tell me more about that? What's something you learned and maybe something you changed based on what you heard in the comments? So my goal as an interviewer is to see if this interviewee meets the competency, and I want to help the interviewer along by probing and asking additional questions. Yeah, no, that's a really good question. In terms of what I heard from what people like, I got a lot of feedback from my viewers saying that my thumbnails, they couldn't really differentiate them. Now, a little bit of background on that. When you look at my thumbnails, they tended to have a white background, some text, and they all kind of look the same. And I got a lot of viewer feedback telling me that. So I took that feedback then. I said, well, we need to improve our thumbnails. So I started coming up with better thumbnails. And then I asked people, hey, what do you think of these new thumbnails? And I got more positive feedback. So this is where I took some viewer feedback, listened to what they were saying, and then made a change based on what I was hearing. So I would use that to answer that probe question, and then I'd continue with my response. Now, along with qualitative ways of understanding the customer, I also use quantitative ways of understanding the customer. For example, YouTube offers a very rich dashboard with analytics where you could look at things like, well, what does the retention look like? What does the watch time look like? What do views look like? And this is another way to establish whether a video is resonating with viewers. So for instance, I did a video recently where I talked about my interview at Amazon and retention was over 50%. So I could tell that the video resonated with viewers. So I should probably make more videos like that in the future, versus there's some other videos I've done where they just haven't resonated as much. And so that's another form or signal from viewers that that's maybe not the type of video that I should continue producing. Now, along with just qualitative and quantitative, there's also competitive. So as I'm pulling together a video, this is another way of understanding customer needs. I could look up what videos maybe competitors or other channels on YouTube have done. Let's say I'm thinking about doing a video and it turns out other people have already done a video on the topic, but it hasn't gotten any views. Well, maybe it's not really a video that people are going to find interesting. So those are 3 different ways that I've used to understand customer needs. Now that I've walked through the actions that I took, we move on to the next step of STARS, and this is the result of your action. So you did all this work, but what came of it? So that's the result portion. So I might say something for this, I listened to customers, I improved my thumbnails, I made all these changes, and as a result of that, views have grown quite a bit and the videos are performing better. In fact, if we look back a year ago, I was getting about 20,000 views a day and I started listening to customers. I made improvements based on what I was hearing. And now today I'm getting over 200,000 views a day. So it's about 10x growth compared to where I was. And all of that is primarily due to listening and responding to feedback. Yeah, okay, no, that sounds great. Thanks for walking through that example. When you think back to all of this work you've done, is there anything you would have done differently, or in retrospect, would you have changed anything for even more growth, or being even more responsive to your viewers and your customers? All right, well, he just asked me the self-reflect step. And so as part of STARS, this is now the S at the end, or basically self-reflect. So think back to what you did and what you would have done differently. So when I think back, there's a lot I would have changed. For example, none of my videos have captions on them. I've heard a bunch of feedback from viewers telling me that maybe I should cover more non-tech topics. So there's all sorts of feedback that I'm hearing from my viewers that I haven't been able to implement yet. And I just need to get to them and I need to work my way through them and see how people respond to them. So there's always more and more things I'm trying to improve, and I've gotten a lot of feedback. I'm simply working my way through the list of all the things I've heard. Now, this is one of the most important steps. You want to demonstrate that you're willing to admit where maybe something could have gone better, where maybe you had another idea that could have improved the results. It's extremely important to demonstrate that you're willing to have a growth mindset. At this point, we've wrapped up on the first question, and then I would jump on to the next question. And typically during an interview, you might have, let's say, 3-4 questions, depending on how deep the candidate goes into the response or how many probing questions you have. But it's very easy to spend about 40-45 minutes just on 2 to 3 or even 4 questions. Once all of the core questions wrap up, this is when I would hand it over to the candidate and say, hey, what questions do you have for me? Now it's my opportunity to ask questions. And pretty much in any interview that you participate in, you'll always have some time at the end to ask questions. So there's really no reason you shouldn't have some questions prepared ahead of time. Some of my favorite questions to ask: what do you like and dislike about the role? What do you think about the culture of the team, and what does management in the team value? Those are a few good questions that you could ask, and it'll probably spur an interesting conversation with the interviewer. All right, well, thanks so much for coming in for the interview today, and that wraps up the video. If you enjoyed this, please give it a thumbs up. To see future videos like this, hit that subscribe button. If you want to see me cover any other topics in the future, leave a comment down below. All right, well, that's all I had for you today. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.